Hey you guys, today I'm going to share with you how to apply tabletop epoxy to get this super shiny, super smooth, pretty perfect finish. And as you can see, there is no bubbles, no dust, no imperfections. And I developed these steps or this technique, and it's been working pretty good for me. So that's what I want to share with you. Let's get right into it. Now this is the board we'll be working on today, and the first thing you need to do is to sand your board to 150 grit and then wipe off all the excess dust with some denatured alcohol or isopropyl alcohol. Once your board is clean, you need to mix some penetrating epoxy. All brands make them. I used the Total Boat just because this is the first one I ever used and it worked so well, so I decided to keep using it. So you're mixing this epoxy, it's a 2-to-1 ratio and it's very, very thin, it's like water-like. And you brush it on your board to seal the wood. You want to seal the wood. If you don't seal it, especially porous woods like burrs, ancient redwood and so on, it will release bubbles, it will release the air and it will cause you trouble. Then let that penetrating epoxy cure for 24 hours and you end up with something like this. This side has the penetrating epoxy, this does not. That's the back of my board. So as you can see, we have the light, you will see it, it has imperfections, it has bubbles because the wood released bubbles. This is some ancient redwood, has a very curly figure. It was super dry, super porous and released tons and tons of bubbles. But now it's all sealed, so when we do the top coat, it should not give us any trouble. Now, if you just put the tabletop straight on top of this, because this is so slick, it will not bond properly, so we need to sand this down. So I'm going to sand it now with 180. Now, before I sand it, very important, I am going to take a paper towel with some water, and I am going to wipe off this shiny surface. You want to do that because some epoxies, not all of them, but some epoxies, when they cure, they release this chemical. I can't remember exactly what it is. I read about it. And this chemical forms a film on top of your epoxy, and that chemical reacts with other epoxies and will give you fisheye. Fisheye, if you're not familiar with it, an epoxy word, is when you get thousands and thousands of little dimples, like the whole board will be covered evenly with this dimple texture. And I had that happen to me once and it was very frustrating. I didn't know what was happening. I kept sanding it down, recoating it, sanding it down, recoating it. I did like 6 times until I read about it and I realized that I have fisheye. And all I need to do is wipe it off with some water because whatever that chemical is, it forms a film on the top. It is water soluble, so if you wipe it with a wet rag, you will remove it. So I'm gonna do that with a rag. I'm gonna wipe it with water and then I'm going to sand it with 180. Just a quick wipe, doesn't take much at all. And this is before the sanding. All right. Now also very, very important, you use a brand new sanding pad. I have a lot of used a little bit sanding pads around my shop. I'm not gonna use that on this particular step because if you have sanding this, then maybe you used it to do a cutting board or something that had oil or wax on it, that will react with the epoxy and gives you problems. So you want a brand new sanding pad that has no oils on it, nothing. It is very clean. So I'm gonna use 180 and lightly sand the top of this board. I am also elevating my board into this tri-grips from Miles Craft. I'll put this in the description below. So I put this in here just because my tabletop does have oils from finishing cutting boards and whatever, so I don't want anything to contaminate this epoxy. So I have it raised on those blocks, and those blocks I only use for this purpose only. I do not use it for sanding cutting boards or anything like that. I have different ones for that. Brand new sanding disc. Once I get it in here, let's see. And now I'm just going to lightly sand this board. The board is sanded. Now I am going to get some denatured alcohol and a paper towel and wipe the dust away. Make sure when you sand your edges as well. Now on the back of it, I will be putting some blue tape because that tabletop epoxy will drape over the back, and I want to make sure it's going to be easier for me to remove those drips sanded down. So I'm going to put some blue tape on the edges. So now the board is sanded and has the blue tape on the back. It's time to do the tabletop. For the tabletop epoxy, I'll be using this super clear tabletop epoxy top coat. And it's very important you use the appropriate epoxy. It doesn't have to be this brand. You can use whatever brand you want, but you want to have a tabletop epoxy. You could use regular epoxy and it will give you that glossy finish. There's two problems with just using regular epoxy for a tabletop, and that is one, it is too thin, so it will not have that dome effect. You don't get those nice rounded edges. You will get those sharp edges, and it's just not going to look very well finished. And then the second reason why you don't want to use regular epoxy for this is that regular epoxy, the thinner you put it, the longer it will take to cure. So instead of curing in 24 hours, it will take 5 days for it to harden, not cure, harden, I should say. And then that will just leave more time for dust and imperfections to happen there, to fall into your board. So you want it to be done as quick as possible so you have less risk of, ruining it. The next tip I can give you is before you start mixing your tabletop epoxy, take the part A, not the part B, this is the part B. Take the part A, which the epoxy part, this is the hardener. So take the epoxy part, the part A, and put it in warm water. Put the whole bottle into a bucket of warm water for about 15-20 minutes. You want to warm it up. Don't put the hardener into the hot water because this doesn't need it. This is very liquidy. It will not cause us any trouble. It's the epoxy part that is the super thick one, and the thicker the epoxy it is, the harder it is for the bubbles to rise to the surface, and the harder it is for us to pop those bubbles. So by warming it up, first of all, it produces a lot less bubbles when you mix it. You want to mix it by hand. And less bubbles when you mix it, and also a lot easier to remove the bubbles and a lot faster once you poured it. Again, you want to do it as quick as possible because the more you take your time to pop those bubbles, the more time there is for dust to fall into it or who knows what. For this size board, I need about 4 ounces of epoxy, but I'll be mixing 5 just in case, so I have some extra. I don't pour my epoxy tabletop in the shop because it is very dusty here, so plus, you will have to sit there for over 24 hours, and I need my shop, so I will do it in the mechanical room. So we're gonna go there. It's a little bit louder there. I hope you'll be able to hear me. And I'm gonna take you through the steps on what we'll be doing there, just in case you won't be able to hear me so well. So I will go and put my board on some painter triangles. Let me show you what they look like. They look something like this. I have these red ones, and I think the ones I have right now on the table and the mechanical room, they are yellow. Now on my table there where I work, first of all, the table, it's very leveled. That on my table I have this silicone mat. Epoxy does not stick to silicone. And I bought this mat on Amazon. I bought it because it's super long. It's 7 feet long, so it's even longer than my table, and it's as wide as my table. It's 2 feet. And it was so much cheaper than buying epoxy specific silicone mats that are usually a lot smaller and a lot more expensive. I'll put a link to that one in the description below. It is kind of white clear, and what you will see through it is a pattern of a plastic tablecloth that I have underneath. So I have my silicone mat, and then on top of the silicone mat I put a trash bag just to collect all the drips so it doesn't go on my silicone mat. Even though it's easier to clean, it will be so many drips that it's easier to just put something over it that I can just throw out afterwards. On top of the trash can, on the trash bag, I will have this painter's triangles. I think the ones I have there, like I said, they're yellow. And then my board is going to sit on those painter's triangles, and that's how I will put my board in order to put the tabletop epoxy. I will mix my epoxy by hand. You do not want to mix it with the drill attachment, and you do not want to put it in a vacuum chamber. Tabletop epoxy only has about 10 minutes working time, max of 20 minutes. So you want it to be everything fairly quickly. So I'll just mix it by hand. I'll put it on my board. I will be wearing gloves. I recommend you buy some better gloves, not your typical blue, doctor gloves. I don't know what those are called. I will put the link in the description below to the ones I use. They're very thick, they do not rip, and protects my skin from touching the epoxy. Now after I'll put the epoxy tabletop and pop all the bubbles, which I will show you in the next clip, you will see me put a plastic tub over my epoxy board to prevent dust falling into it. One pro tip over here, make sure you wipe your plastic tub with a wet paper towel or cloth. Remove the dust from it. I didn't do that yesterday as I was finished this board, which I think is so nice. I just put the tabletop on it, and then over here, big piece of dust. Can you see it? Let's see, over there. Big piece of dust fell in it that was in the tub. I didn't wipe it yesterday, I just assumed it was clean because I use it every day, but it was not clean, and now I will have to sand that board and refinish it. So let's go into the mechanical room and we'll see how I will be putting the epoxy top on it. Now, while I'm wearing gloves, by the way, this is the gloves I am using. Super thick, really nice, good quality. I'll put them in the description below. So with my gloves on, I am going to give this board one more wipe with denatured alcohol. And the reason why is because, one, it's been a while since we last talked, so maybe some dust settled on it, and also because I touched it with my bare hands, some oils from my hand could be on it, and that could cause troubles as well. So now that I have my gloves on, give it one last wipe, and it will dry by the time I mix my epoxy. So now I'm going to go mix my epoxy. Here is my 5 ounces of epoxy. You can see part 1 and part 2. And I'll be slowly mixing it with this popsicle stick. And I will mix it, you see how it's cloudy right now? I will mix it until it becomes clear. It takes about 2 minutes. The slower you mix it, the less bubbles you will have. So keep mixing it, make sure you scrape the walls because you do not want any soft spots. Soft spots is when your epoxy is not thoroughly mixed, and then your epoxy doesn't cure and stay sticky and soft, and there's no way to fix that afterwards. So I'm going to mix this for 2 minutes and then I'll see you then. So here is my epoxy all mixed in. It is clear, it doesn't have any cloudiness as you can see, but it does have lots of bubbles, which is okay. So the way I like to do this, I will pour it closer to the edge. Try to put like an even coat, or as even as I can. And then I'll put the rest of it, dump it in the middle. I'll put this aside. And then what I'll do with my hand, I will take this edge and kind of take it to the edge and rub it in. Make sure that this edge is getting coated so it doesn't have any kind of tension as the epoxy goes to the edge, and it will drip over it nicely. All right, once I got all those edges, now I'm gonna go do the whole edge, going down the board. Move some of this epoxy down. And when I put my fingers on the edge to rub it like this, I'm also kind of curling it inward a little bit just to make sure that my tabletop epoxy, it does wrap all around to my blue tape. Take your time and really get the edges. In the beginning, that was my biggest problem. The edges were never even, or I was missing a little bit of spot or something. So take your time, make sure your edges are coated. And you will feel it because it will become smooth to the touch and it doesn't drag. If it drags, that means you probably have a dry spot. I think I got my edges pretty good. So now I will just do this pat motion and kind of disperse the rest of the epoxy evenly to the top. They make special combs. I had some, I think Total Boat makes them, for making sure that you're evenly dispersing the epoxy on your board. I've used them before. This method seems to work best for me. So this is what I'm doing. Just tap, tap, tap motion. If you feel you have too much epoxy, like I poured the whole 5 ounces, you can push some to the side and get rid of some. And it will, you know, drip down. All right. Now I will take my gloves off. And I'm going to zoom you in so you can see tons of bubbles in there. And now I will take my torch. I just use this small Dremel one. If you have a bigger one, it probably works best. So what I like to do, can you see all right in there? Yes, I think you do. I like to do is just start at the edges, and I'll just go up and down motion and go all around my board, do all the edges. Once I got all four sides, now I start doing the top. And don't worry, I'll bring you in closer once we're done. So I'll do this half. I have to walk around the table to come to this other side. And now I do this side. And it's already looking really, really good. I am going to get you off the tripod and bring you in closer. This is the way it's looking. So a couple of bubbles, I will pop them in the next round. I will let this sit for 5 minutes, and then I will do the popping the bubbles again. And I just ran over with the torch again. It's looking great. And now I'm going to cover it with this plastic tub and let it sit there for 2 days until it cures, and we are done. As you can see, not hard at all, but it does take a few steps. I hope this was helpful to you and you learned something new. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Skylar Ewing, and I'll see you in my next video.